listening to the Exitology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the International Business Growth Radio Network. I'm Jason Wally Waldron, and I am joined here today by Abby Donnelly. And Abby and I have been talking succession planning. So Abby, you and I on the break, we were talking about all these different stories that you have because you're down in there every single day talking with people, talking to these CEOs. Oftentimes they've owned, they might be the founder of this business and owned it for 40 years, and they're getting up there in the years, and sometimes they're not open to talking about succession. It's a very emotional topic. Kind of feels like a piece of them are dying with the business. There's all sorts of stuff to unpack. So maybe you could start by just could you walk us through maybe a representative example client that you've worked with, and kind of what does that journey look like?
Yeah, so I've got two examples, two different clients on two different aspects of the business that I think would be really illustrative of the kinds of things that I run into all the time, and I think are really very common with other business owners. Mm-hmm. So the first one is an owner that came to me a number of years ago and said, Abby, I have had 3 folks that have been working with me for a long time. They have helped me build this business. I've had conversations with them over the years, and I'm very interested in having them take over and run the company. I want to sell the business to them. One of them is my son, and he's been with me for about 8 years. And the other 2 are key employees, both of whom started when they were between 18 and 20 years old. And now they are basically running the company under my leadership.
Cool.
He said, what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to develop them and position the company under their leadership so that I can transfer ownership and leadership to them. And then I want your help figuring out what my next chapter will look like.
Wow.
So that was the way that we started. And I started working with the 3 successors. And one of the things that came up pretty early on in a very confidential conversation with the son was the son confided in me that he had no interest in running the company. The only reason he'd been working in the business was because he loved his dad and he wanted to support his dad, and his dad needed some help in an area that he had expertise in. Oh. And so he came in and ran that part of the business for a while, but he didn't want to run it himself. He got along well with the other 2, and he was fine with them choosing to run it, but he didn't want to be a part of it. Wow. And he didn't know how to tell his dad.
That's really interesting. So before we continue with this story, sure. I want to point out a couple things. So on paper, we had essentially a management buyout waiting to happen. But life has a way of being very different than what it looks like on paper, right?
Yes.
And so what I think is important about that too is that father-son situation, because I don't want to let dad down, but also this is his thing, not mine, right?
Yep.
So you're helping. So go on. Yeah.
I was going to say, and sometimes the opposite happens where, son or daughter, niece, nephew, whatever, is trying so hard to prove to the owner, parent, uncle, whatever, and that they are capable of running the company. And they feel like no matter what they do, the message they keep hearing is, it's not enough. It's not enough. You seem to be doing well on this, but not enough of that. And so it can really go both ways. Yeah. And I see a lot more of the successor feeling undervalued or unproven than I see the opposite.
Okay.
But it's important for owners, I think, to understand that they have to pick the best successor, which isn't necessarily the most obvious successor.
And talking about succession planning, which, the term's been around for a long time, but for how long the term has been around, it seems like there's still not nearly enough of it being done. I'm curious, do most companies have a succession plan out there?
Well, the statistics, I laughed out loud because the statistics are horrendous. I think that, depending on which study you look at, it's something like 14% of companies have a written succession plan.
Okay.
But I promise you that if you ask owners if they have a succession plan, Many of them will say absolutely, and they know what they want to happen to the business. I would argue that that's sort of a conceptual model, and it hasn't necessarily been battle tested yet.
Okay.
And that's okay, but the only way you're going to get there is to battle test the plan.
So in this case where you were battle testing this plan, you had the management buyout figured out, or you thought you did. 2 key employees plus son. Son says nope. Then what happens?
Yeah, so then it was interesting because the other 2 leaders were very, very capable leaders. And in the company at the size it was when they started having these conversations, they would have done a phenomenal job taking over and running that business. They had the skills, they had the experience. Unfortunately, I use that in quotes. Nobody can see me, but I'm using quotes around my unfortunately, air quotes. There you go. And what had happened was the business had been so successful, it had grown to a point where the capability and capacity of those 2 successors was outstripping what the business needed to maintain and grow to the next level. And so I had a conversation with the owner about how to either supplement that gap or to look at some other options, because those 2 were not going to be in a position to fully take over and run and expect it to be successful.
Gotcha.
And that was a leadership perspective, right. But there was also a very big financial implication. Yep. The owner was prepared to finance the deal, which, in layman's terms mean use their money to do the buyout.
Yep.
But the business needed an infusion of cash because they needed to replace aging equipment. They needed to, upgrade their technology. So they needed some additional cash that the owner just either couldn't put into it or wasn't willing to put into it. And the successors didn't have that either.
Yeah. So there's a lot of moving parts, I hope, if nothing else, that you all start to understand as you're listening to this, because just because it looks good on paper. So the owner says, oh, I can do an owner carry over here, take some of the risk away from these folks, create a space for them to lead the business and grow it over here. And then as you go in and you start to unpack it, well, one of your successors doesn't want to take the baton and run with it. The other 2 aren't capable of taking the business to this next level. And I think that really speaks to, the importance of having that outside perspective when you're going through this process. And I don't like the term "your baby's ugly," but some people use that term out there. At some point, the term that I usually use is you're usually too close to it. And how do I know that? Because even a chiropractor needs another chiropractor to crack his back, right? And It's a silly example, but it's true, right? A dentist needs another dentist to look at their stuff once in a while. My point being that even if you really, really know your business, there's always a blind spot there, and there's always an improvement that could be done. And so I'm hoping folks, see what happened here, which is they thought that they were going in one direction. They ended up pivoting into a totally different direction. How does the rest of the story end?
So in the end, the owner thought about supplementing the third person, but bringing in a third person to supplement the other 2 leaders that were going to stick around.
Yep.
And what he realized is in order for that to happen, that third person was going to have to bring some cash into it. Mm-hmm. And that's actually the path that we traveled down for some time. And the challenge was that the people that we found could not bring in enough cash to be able to both buy the business and build the capital investments that were necessary.
Yep.
So what finally happened in the very end was that the owner ended up selling to a third-party private equity that had the investment capital to put in and upgrade the equipment and technology and all that kind of stuff. And what was wonderful about it was that the 2 successors that were highly capable now were in a position to lead the company, but they had support from the private equity. And the original owner of the company was interested in sticking around for a year or 2, having taken, a lot of risk off the table, and develop those leaders even more. And then once he left, that team could continue on and run that business. And it ended up working out really well for all. The successors were actually relieved that they didn't have to invest money that they didn't have or be hooked for the risk.
I think one of the takeaways there, at least from the exotology perspective, is don't be afraid to bend like the reed in the wind a little bit. And what I mean by that is, you want to stay rooted in the idea of finding your exit, and you want to stay rooted in the idea of continuing to build value into the world, but you do want to be flexible enough when the winds of change blow to be able to stay rooted but still move with it, because the your advisors are going to be much more connected than you are. They're going to have seen a lot more of these situations, and their level of expertise is going to be very different than what you might have from just your CEO suite there, because you're battle hardened, right? I mean, that you're kind of in the foxhole a little bit, and so I think the CEO should be congratulated for being wise enough to take some risk off the table, but still actually buy themselves some time to go through that transition. And what I think is unique about your approach, Abby, is that you're building leadership and capacity along the way with these folks.
That's exactly right. And it really speaks a lot, I think, to what you do as well, because what you're building is capacity in the organization. You're building that value in, and you're looking at what it takes to make the business more valuable. So it either attracts a better deal for the owner, or the successors now have a business that is worth more and is more fun to run. A better running business is more fun to run. And it's got potential for growth and exponential capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple of ways that our practices certainly intersect. One is, at Exotology, if we have a company that is, say, at 12 million in revenue, but they understand that they've got 25 million of capacity that they just need to fill up, most of the time it's a combination of people, processes, and a few other things. And so we'll walk in there and, that's a layup for us. We'll fill that up right away. But the most important aspect of, as we're doing that, we're going to adhere to a transferable value metric, that one number that really matters. And it really intersects with the idea of statistics, because if we can put you at a best-in-class transferable value metric by filling up that capacity that's built and it's all done in the right way, that's when the magic happens. So, thank you for walking us through that case study. We will be back after about 2 minutes here. We are with Abby Donnelly of the Leadership and Legacy Group. Be right back with you here on the Exotology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show.